There are moments in history that ask us to pause, to listen a little closer, and to recognize that something bigger than politics is unfolding before our eyes. This, right now, is one of those moments. For years, the world has spoken about peace in the Middle East as if it were a distant dream, something fragile, unreachable, always just out of grasp. But what if we've been looking at it the wrong way? What if peace doesn't begin with the absence of conflict, but with the presence of courage? When I look at what's being discussed today, the possibility of a new deal for Gaza, I don't see just another negotiation. I see the beginning of a turning point. I see a vision that dares to imagine what has never been possible before, stability born from strength, progress built on partnership, and hope finally returning to a place that has seen too much pain. And I want to ask you to stay with me. Because this isn't just a story about policy, it's a story about people. About mothers who pray for safety, children who deserve a future, and leaders who understand that the greatest power is the power to unite. This speech isn't about taking sides. It's about understanding what it truly means to lead, to stand at the crossroads of history and choose courage over comfort. It's about a deal that could open a new chapter for the world, not just for Gaza or for one administration, but for humanity itself. So, I invite you to listen, not as critics, not as partisans, but as citizens of a world that needs healing. Because when leadership dares to build peace through strength, it doesn't just change policy, it changes destiny. Bryce Channel. When we talk about restoring stability through leadership, it's easy to imagine that it begins in grand conference rooms or through signatures on official documents. But real leadership, the kind that changes history, begins in conviction. It begins in the quiet decision to stand for something when it would be easier to remain silent. For years, the situation in Gaza has tested the patience and hope of the world. Generations have grown up knowing only uncertainty, living with the belief that peace was a dream promised but never delivered. Yet today, we find ourselves at a moment where strength and vision might finally meet, where a leader is willing to say, it's time to stop managing chaos and start building peace. True leadership doesn't chase applause, it pursues purpose. It's not about who takes credit but about who takes responsibility. And that's what this new approach to Gaza represents, a recognition that peace can't be imposed, it must be inspired. Stability isn't born out of fragile ceasefires that crumble with time, it's born out of mutual respect, shared goals, and a willingness to take bold, sometimes unpopular steps toward what is right, not what is easy. There's a power in decisive leadership that many underestimate. The ability to hold firm when the world demands compromise, to see beyond the moment and into the legacy that comes after it. For too long, discussions around Gaza have been caught in cycles of accusation and retreat. But leadership requires a breaking of patterns, a willingness to step forward when others hesitate. This potential deal signals that kind of courage. It dares to rewrite the conversation. Instead of focusing on the boundaries that divide, it seeks to build frameworks that connect. Instead of managing hostility, it looks to plant the seeds of cooperation. When you look at history, you see that stability always follows strength. Not the strength that intimidates, but the strength that inspires confidence. People follow leaders who believe in something greater than themselves. And that belief is contagious, it ignites hope where fear once ruled. In Gaza, that hope is not abstract. It's the hope of a mother putting her children to bed without the sound of sirens. It's the hope of a young man finding work, of a family rebuilding their home without fear of losing it again. These are not political dreams, they're human ones. And every great peace begins by recognizing the humanity that politics often forgets. But leadership is also about patience. Stability doesn't happen overnight, it requires trust, and trust must be earned through consistency. This is why real peace requires more than words, it requires follow-through, integrity, and accountability. It's not enough to say, we will bring peace. It must be lived out in every policy, every negotiation, and every choice that values human life over political leverage. That's what separates leadership from rhetoric, the willingness. For too long, the conversation about peace has been defined by division. We've built walls, sometimes physical, often emotional, between people who share the same sky but not the same sense of security. Yet peace is never truly achieved through separation, it's built through connection. When we talk about building bridges, we're talking about something far deeper than diplomacy. We're talking about rehumanizing one another, about seeing faces, not factions. That's what this moment demands of us. It challenges us to believe that compassion can coexist with strength, and that unity is not naive, it's necessary. Every lasting peace begins with a shift in perspective. When the focus turns from who is right to what is right, progress begins to take shape. The Gaza deal, if realized with integrity, represents that kind of shift. It's not about ignoring history, it's about learning from it. It acknowledges the wounds, but it also dares to imagine healing. That takes courage, because building bridges isn't easy. It asks us to extend our hand across decades of mistrust, to see potential where pain once lived, and to believe in dialogue even when silence feels safer. Real leadership knows that the language of peace is not written in documents alone, it's written in actions that restore dignity. It's found in the small, quiet choices that rebuild trust, an open border for aid, a restored school, a shared economic project that gives families reason to hope again. These are the bridges that matter most. They don't just connect lands, they connect hearts. And when people begin to see each other not as enemies, but as neighbors, peace becomes something tangible. Too often, the world has treated Gaza as a problem to be solved rather than a people to be understood. But building bridges means recognizing that the future of peace is rooted in empathy. When you listen to a child's laughter in a rebuilt home, when you witness a community rise from rubble, you realize that hope is not abstract, it's deeply human. It's what binds us all, regardless of geography or politics. The beauty of bridge building is that it doesn't deny differences, it honors them. It allows dialogue to replace destruction, and partnership to replace fear. And in that exchange, both sides grow stronger. Because no wall, no barrier, no border has ever produced peace. What builds peace is the willingness to meet in the middle, to compromise without surrendering principle, and to see that the well-being of one side is inseparable from the well-being of the other. There's an incredible power in showing that compassion and strength are not opposites, they are allies. Some might mistake bridge building for weakness, but it's quite the opposite. It takes immense courage to reach across the divide, to face criticism from your own, to say, we will no longer let fear dictate our destiny. It's the courage to envision a world where coexistence replaces conflict and shared prosperity replaces shared pain. Peace that lives only in words will always fade. To last, it must take root in people's lives, in their ability to work, to dream, to provide for their families. That is why the economic path to peace is not just an idea, it is a necessity. You cannot rebuild a nation on promises alone. You rebuild it on opportunity. And that is what this new approach seeks to achieve, transforming peace from an abstract hope into a tangible reality that people can feel in their everyday lives. When a region like Gaza begins to see movement in its economy, everything changes. It's not simply about money, it's about dignity. It's about a father who can finally provide for his family without fear of losing everything overnight. It's about young people who have never known stability finding a sense of purpose, a reason to stay, to create, to believe that their future is worth investing in. Peace becomes real when prosperity gives people something to protect. That is the power of an economy built on shared interest rather than shared pain. Too often, leaders have tried to build peace from the top down, when it must also come from the ground up. Policies can create frameworks, but it's people who create progress. When new businesses open, when infrastructure improves, when trade begins to flow, it sends a powerful message: hope has value again. And once people see the fruits of that hope, they will fight to preserve it far more fiercely than any treaty could demand. The key to long-term stability isn't control, it's collaboration. It's empowering communities to thrive, not just survive. Economic renewal also invites a deeper kind of partnership. Imagine factories that employ both Israeli and Palestinian workers, or investment zones that unite rather than divide. Imagine international companies not just funding projects, but mentoring young entrepreneurs, training engineers, and investing in the next generation of innovation. Those are the foundations that turn fragile agreements into lasting peace. Because when people build together, they learn to trust together. It's not just about trade, it's about transformation. An economy gives people ownership of their own destiny. It allows them to look forward instead of backward. It replaces resentment with purpose. And in doing so, it slowly erodes the roots of conflict. Because where there is opportunity, there is hope. And where there is hope, extremism loses its grip. We must also remember that prosperity is contagious. When one region begins to rise, it creates ripples of progress across borders. A thriving Gaza can inspire neighboring regions to follow. It can encourage collaboration in energy, technology, agriculture, and education. The world has seen this story before, places once torn apart by conflict becoming centers of innovation because leaders had the courage to invest, not withdraw. And that courage always pays dividends far greater than anyone could have imagined. Leadership in this moment means understanding. There are moments when history turns a page, when one decision changes not just a policy, but the direction of the world. This moment feels like one of those. The idea that a single agreement, a bold, carefully crafted Gaza deal, could reshape global diplomacy may sound ambitious, even impossible. But so did every breakthrough before it. What makes this moment different is not the politics behind it, but the principle driving it, the belief that diplomacy should deliver results, not rhetoric. It's about transforming the very definition of leadership on the world stage, from words to outcomes, from intentions to impact. For too long, diplomacy has been trapped in cycles of discussion without resolution, where promises fade and peace remains just out of reach. But now, there is an opportunity to redefine what leadership looks like, an opportunity to show that strength and diplomacy are not opposites, they are two sides of the same coin. True diplomacy does not mean yielding to pressure or appeasing conflict, it means leading with clarity, conviction, and courage. It means setting a standard that peace is not negotiated through weakness, but achieved through purpose. If this deal succeeds, it could mark the beginning of a new era, one where America reclaims its role as a force for stability, not through domination, but through decisive vision. It could show the world that leadership is not about how loudly one speaks, but how steadfastly one stands for peace. For decades, leaders have spoken of change in this region. Many have tried, and many have failed. But every effort laid a stone on the path that leads to this moment. And now, the world is watching to see if this time, those stones will finally lead to something lasting. This isn't just a political breakthrough, it's a moral one. Because at its core, this deal represents something larger than diplomacy. It represents accountability. It says that peace is not just a word we repeat in press conferences, it's a promise we keep through action. It reminds nations everywhere that leadership carries a sacred responsibility, to serve not just power, but people. And when a leader commits to that purpose, even in the face of global skepticism, it sends a signal that echoes far beyond one region. It tells the world that the age of endless negotiation without progress is over. But this shift won't come easily. The world has grown accustomed to cynicism, to expecting failure before it happens. There will be voices that doubt, critics who dismiss, and nations that resist change. Yet progress has never been born in comfort. Every great chapter in history was written by those who dared to push past disbelief. Real diplomacy demands persistence. It demands patience. It demands the strength to listen and the wisdom to act when the moment calls for courage. The significance of this deal goes beyond Gaza. It could set a new precedent for how nations engage with one another, one rooted in balance, fairness, and may-assur.